Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this session on designing data centers. My name is Di Davis, and I am joined by three experts in the field. Nabeel Mahmood, who's CEO of his own firm, Mahmood. Mark Acton, who is DCA advisory board member of an independent data consultant, I should say, of the DCI advisory board member. And finally, Swanson 10, who's head of technology research and development of IDC Alibaba in China. So we have a very international panel, Mahmood being in the US at the moment. So welcome again to this panel. And let me start straight away by asking the panel very briefly to introduce themselves further. Nabeel, can I start with you?
Absolutely. Well, Di, good to meet you in person. Mark, great seeing you. And Swanson, pleasure meeting you as well. Nabeel Mahmood, I'm the CEO of Mahmood Incorporated. We're headquartered in the United States. I also serve on the board for United Security Bank, which is a publicly traded bank, as well as Layer 9 data centers. We are a new data center firm out of Mexico in Querétaro. And then I also serve on the board for SCB Global and Critical Ventures. So a couple of other firms.
Thank you. Mark, can I turn to you?
Sure, thanks, Di. Thanks for having me, first of all. Independent consultant, specializing in data centers, as you said. I am on the DCA advisory board, as you suggest. I'm also on a number of committees that are currently defining both European and global data center standards. There's quite a lot happening in that area at the moment in relation to design and operations and energy efficiency. I also represent Future Tech as the head of technical due diligence and a couple of other clients as well. So, fingers in sort of quite a few pies.
Thank you, Mark. And we're going from I guess west to east in the world. So in the finally in the Far East, I should say, Swanson being in China. Over to you, Swanson.
Okay, pleasure to meet you all here. So currently, I'm working as the role for the head of the data center design and the technical research and development in Alibaba. So I was in charge of all the design for the data center for Alibaba, including the self-owned data centers and the colo data centers. So pleasure to meet you here.
Thank you. So let's get stuck in straight away, and let me ask you a leading question. I'll start with Nabeel if I can for an answer. What's the single most important factor or design factor which affects the overall cost of the data center? What would you say in answer to that, Nabeel?
Well, I mean, it's hard to actually pin down one single cost factor, right? You look at a national basis right now, for instance. In America, in Silicon Valley, we're looking at roughly about $1.5 million to $2 million an acre. But I personally believe the single most important thing, as it entails the cost of the data center is concerned, it's got to do with the power. The power purchase agreements really define, how, where, when, and what's the impact on an ongoing basis for a data center is. So, and there are cases that we're looking at about 4.5 to 5 cents a kilowatt per hour in America. And then there are places that we're looking at almost in the 25 to 30 cents a kilowatt.
That's a fair answer. Swanson, would you agree with that? Disagree?
I agree, but I think from my understanding, I think the reliability requirement for the data centers is the single most important factor to affecting the overall cost of the data centers. It will affect the CapEx and OpEx. So I think that will be affect us to which or what kind of solution or architecture of the data center to select it. So I think that the reliability is the most important.
Okay, well, I see. Mark?
No, I completely agree with Swanson. It really depends what you're building. The reason we build data centers is ultimately to support high availability IT services. So, we can build different types of data centers. Let's use the, tier model. There are a number of different models out there for reliability and redundancy. But let's say we use sort of tier equivalents. It's obviously a lot cheaper to build a tier 1 type data center with less resilience and redundancy than it is to build a tier 4, for instance. But I also agree with Mahmood. Nabeel. Sorry. I also agree with Nabeel. The principal cost in a data center is delivering the power infrastructure. If we're talking about CapEx, you've got something like an 80-20 rule in terms of the MEP, the cooling and the power delivery systems, the infrastructure, against the building itself. People think about the building being the true cost, but actually it's really about the MEP infrastructure. And then we go to the OpEx side, and as both Swanson and Nabeel have said, power is absolutely critical. That will, over the lifetime of the data center, be several multiples beyond the actual CapEx of the data center. Running the thing is going to cost a great deal more. And as we all know, power prices are going through the roof. In Europe, we're being threatened with sort of 80 cents a kilowatt hour potentially, up from sort of the 30 cents or so per kilowatt hour. So that is absolutely going through the roof. That is a huge factor.
I mean, we've seen the cost of power going up considerably with political changes in recent year, I should say, and I guess that might well carry on in the future. How do we future-proof the data center from rising power costs, rising energy costs? I mean, is utilizing the waste heat part of the answer, or Mark?
Oh, to me, sorry. Yeah. So I think the utilization of waste heat is a bit of a red herring. Can we reuse the waste heat? Yes. Do we have customers for the waste heat? In most cases, no. Unless you're by a public swimming pool, or you're drying biomass, or you're delivering into a district heating system, it's very, very difficult to use that waste heat. And also, you've got to consider the commercial element of it. Is there going to be a realistic commercial contract to supply that waste heat that will actually offset your operating costs on the power side? Probably not. You can dispose of the waste heat possibly, and someone can use it, and that can create an overall offset for general carbon footprint or energy usage. But it's not going to really have an impact on the data center, and certainly unless there's a commercial contract in place, it's not really going to offset the actual cost. So I think waste heat is a bit of a red herring. But the reality is, you've got to remember, in a data center, what's consuming the energy, the power, is actually IT. It's not the building. So you're generally, as a co-location operator, you're passing those costs through. So it's going to be expensive for the customers, and the customers aren't going to like it. But the reality is, if we want IT services, if we want high availability IT services, and we all do, and governments do, then we're going to have to pay for the power. It's as simple as that. It's not a data center issue. It's an IT issue, ultimately.
Yeah. And maybe IT efficiency. Nabeel, do you have? I think you were going to say something, and
I was just going to add to it. So, I mean, the concept future proof is very broad. I think the biggest challenge, and before we even get into the concept of using waste heat or repurposing or whatever the case might be, the biggest thing that needs to be addressed is the data center utilization in the current state. If you look at a global basis, best case scenario, the data center utilization is sub 50%. We have access stranded capacity. That's been the mindset in the past into how we design and build and operate data center, is that we over design and under provision it. And it doesn't matter who, when, where, and how big of an organization you are, the stranded capacity is at best 50%. That number needs to increase. We need to be at or close to 80%, if not higher, on every single design. As a matter of fact, I am of the belief the only way we can future-proof is by building paper mache data centers. So the cost of reusable data centers, right, or build as much as you need, and then you move on. Going to address the rising cost, the energy element. We need to build data centers that are modular and scalable, is my mindset. Let's build what we are going to need and use, and then you add capacity to it, just like Lego blocks. That'll be the one core element that could potentially address future-proofing data centers. If you look at where we're at today, I mean, from the cost of compute per kilowatt and where we were even 2 to 5 years ago, that's changed significantly. Hardware manufacturers, the technology stack, they have started to get smaller footprint. Their energy utilization has gotten much better. Technology has advanced over the years. So we are taking all corrective actions from that perspective, but our design mindset in wasting real estate and wasting energy hasn't changed. And that needs to change quickly before we start talking about repurposing heat out of the data center.
So IT efficiency, in other words.
Yes, IT efficiency. And then, I'm going to throw this out there for everybody. Like, do we really need to build a rated 4 environment data center? How many of those are out there? Why don't we talk about resiliency and redundancy at the application layer, at the software layer, versus deploying it at the physical layer? Is there a reason to have redundant power feeds? Maybe not. Maybe we talk about a mindset change whereby if we are moving data across the pond in sub 2 milliseconds, does it really make much sense to have a rated 4 or tier 4 environment? I don't think so. We can move data over the network, right?
Can I take that one possibly?
Yeah, I was going to bring Swanson in, but
sorry.
Let me ask Swanson to comment, because he hasn't said something, and then I'll come back to you, Mark.
Sure.
Okay. I think I agree. I said for the heat, with heat is the future proof, and also agree with Mark is that the most important thing is that we should find the end user for the heat with the heat. I think we can utilize the heat from the white balls to heat the resident around the center and grow fish, and more scenarios will be explode for the waste heat utilization from the center. So I think most important thing is that when we plan and design a data center, we should not only consider it as an energy consumption center, we should also consider it as a power generation center. So that means that if we plan to design a data center, it's better we work together with the government to redesign the function around the data center. So that will most important. If there are some end user or some scenario can use the heat from the data center, that will be most important. Yeah.
If I may, I think there is a play for reusing the heat, but it doesn't fit everywhere. Like, I mean, central London probably might be a great play to repurpose that heat and put that out in the neighborhoods or, buildings around, and you can sell that. But would that work in Phoenix, Arizona, or in Dubai? No, it doesn't. Now, if you're talking on a global basis and generalizing the statement, I think it's really more about the design approach, discussion versus the heat evacuation and reusing heat.
Mark, did you want to say something before?
Oh yeah, no, just going back to Nabeel's point about sort of your tier 4 level 4 type data center versus your level 1 and geo redundancy or application level redundancy. I think one of the challenges you've got with some of the particular financial institutions is both regulation plus they have a lot of legacy systems, and you can only really take advantage of geo redundancy or application level redundancy if you're applications are actually set up to do that. And for them, that would be a huge amount of re-engineering, and it's probably cheaper to build your tier 4 than it is to re-engineer all the applications. So I think you're always going to see those companies who effectively are putting all their eggs in one basket to go for that higher level of redundancy, but they're relatively few and far between. They do exist. And I think whilst we've got very, very large volumes of data that really do need to be replicated synchronously over relatively short periods, you're at distances. Sorry, you're going to have a sort of much higher level of redundancy. But I think the other thing to bear in mind when you do go down the application level or geo redundancy level is you've got to have equipment elsewhere ready to take the load if you're going to fail over to another site. So it's a little bit unfair to compare your tier 1 type data center, which is taking advantage of geo or application level redundancy against your tier 4, because you've actually got to take into account that second data center elsewhere that has to be built and has to be available, and frankly, it has to be running with zero load to take that that transferred workload across. So it's not as simplistic as saying, geo redundancy will give you improved energy efficiency. There's a wrinkle to that. So you'll hear a lot of cloud players saying, yeah, we've got really efficient data centers, but they're talking about one single data center when they're taking, again, advantage of geo redundancy. So, it's not quite as simple as it sounds.
Yeah, and Mark, I was not trying to make it as simple. I wish I had a magic wand.
No, if only it were simple, Bill.
Exactly. Well, that's the reason why we've got our jobs. But to add to what you're saying, I think you bring a great point together, and that is, once we are able to get past all these silos that we've got in our space, and we can get the folks at the application layer talking to the folks, the technical stack, talking to the folks that are designing and operating data centers at the physical layer, then we can address that, right? So not every application is going to have to be geo-redundant, but it can be. There are legacy systems. I mean, great examples of New York and New Jersey's employment insurance. They're still operating in COBOL. So there are those exceptions out. But you bring a great point. I think future-proofing DAI, putting that in perspective, it means unification of every single business unit within the data center community, whether it be an owner operator or a colo wholesale provider or cloud providers.
Yeah. And that sort of legacy silo mentality, I think, probably is the biggest barrier to true energy efficiency in data centers, to be honest. It's a human thing rather than a technical thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, let's move on. Let's move on to something. I'll pick up something that you said, Nabeel, which is where you talked about location, and you talked about obviously you can't harder to utilize heat in places like Phoenix, Arizona, than or Central London even. To what extent do environmental factors impinge upon the real world of designing and running data centers? I mean, are environmental factors a red herring or not?
Well, the environmental factors are important, right, to consider from a design and operation perspective, but they are not something that should hold us back. I mean, I think besides Antarctica, we have actually tried every place else in the world to operate data centers. Now, every place has got their own requirements. I mean, for instance, let's look at free cooling as an option. Where is it available? That's going to change the design approach. Heat evacuation and repurposing heat. I mean, you being in Alaska, I think that has a much bigger play than operating that in Phoenix, Arizona, or in Dubai. Mm-hmm. So it's really very much derivative of where you're at. What are the local regulations and jurisdictions as well. So the environmental factor plays a significant role in designing and operating. And also what the carbon offset is, from a leadership perspective. What are the targets and incentives that they need to hit?
Okay. Swanson, in China, are environmental factors at play at all in the design of data centers?
I think yes. That, for example, the air quality, the climate, noise control. All these the factors will directly impinge the design and operation of the data center. So, for example, some of the data centers of Alibaba is located in north of China. So for those areas, there's some sandstorm happened in spring. So when we design and operation the data center, we should take measurement to protect the servers or equipment when we're running the data center.
Mark, have you got any comments on environmental factors?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Nabeel. You know, we're always going to have to look at our data center design based on the local ambient environment, be it temperature, be it humidity, or be it altitude. It all affects the cooling, really, and our cooling efficiency, is often predicated by our ability to use free cooling. So if you're in more northern climates, you've got colder ambient temperatures for a greater period of the year. So, you will inevitably be more energy efficient on the cooling side because of that. And interestingly, some of those northern areas also have a lot of hydropower. So if you look at the Nordics, for instance, Northern Europe, there's a great deal of green power from hydro, etc., which is why you're seeing a lot of data center activity up there. And the waste heat is more valuable because they've all got district heating systems for the winter because it's so cold. So yeah, the design absolutely is going to be affected by local ambient conditions. And if you're not designing for local ambient conditions, you've got a problem because the local temperature may exceed the design capacity of your cooling systems, and you lose your data center. So it's absolutely fundamental, no question.
Let's move on to a topic which I know is closer to your heart, Mark, because you're involved with it in Data Center Alliance, which is standards, and what about the effect of standards? What are standards affecting the design of data centers?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, without endorsing any particular standard or set of recommendations, unless we can compare in some useful manner our data centers, how do we know what we're buying? So standards give us a benchmark. Standards give us the ability to actually compare and contrast sensibly and knowledgeably. So without those standards, we're going to struggle. How do we know what's good, what's bad, or what we really want? I think the standards landscape is changing, though. I think up to now, you've had a lot of competing standards and things that claim to be standards. Some are national, some are proprietary. What we are seeing, though, is a greater influence from ISO, so for developing global standards for data centers. So we've got the ISO 22237 standard, which is coming out, which is really around design, your resilience levels, et cetera, et cetera. So how you design your data center, how you define resilience and reliability. You've also got from ISO the 30134 series, which are defining a series of essentially sustainability metrics. We've all heard of PUE, which is all, we don't really like it necessarily. It's frequently used incorrectly as a proxy for energy efficiency. It's not actually an energy efficiency metric at all. But I think what we are seeing is other metrics and KPIs that are defined by ISO in the same series as PUE becoming more important and being recognized. So we've got water usage, we've got carbon usage, we've got energy reuse, which is the waste heat. We've also got renewable energy factor, so the amount of renewable energy that we're actually using to power our data centers. So these, I think, will hopefully supersede PUE in looking at overall sustainability. And by the way, if people are quoting PUE, if they're quoting anything other than ISO 30134-2, it's not PUE, it's something else. So people need to be aware of this series and actually take advantage of all the metrics in it. Very, very important to again, create that level playing field and true, genuine global benchmark.
Nabeel, are you seeing standards having an impact on what you're doing in the US or from the US?
Yeah, so much more now than it ever has. I think, I'll just echo what Mark said. It is important to standardize on the design, build, and operation strategies, because what we don't know is what we can't fix. And if everybody's got their own way of measuring it, then it's not going to work. And I'll echo what Mark said. I mean, PUE has been a great metric. It's been a great starting point, but everybody's understanding and an interpretation of it is different. It's as clear as mud. So having that clear definition of what the global standards need to be and what the KPIs are, and everybody is calculating in the same way, is critical for us to continue to improve what we are doing in designing and operating data centers. And it needs to be global. And a simple example of that I would give is miles per gallon is a global standard of measuring how fast the car can go and what the energy consumption of that car is. So why can't we have that in our space, in the data center space? It's measured the same way in America as it's measured in the UK or it's measured in China. Miles per gallon, a single unified metric, and that's what's needed in our industry.
Swanson, we've got the advantage here of having an international panel. Are you seeing standards becoming increasingly important in China?
Yes, I totally agree with Mark and use outside. So, for example, the China government will be issue a new standard next year, both for the PUE and the WE. Especially for the WE, there will be a very lower standard. So as I remember, it should be no higher than 1.4 for the WE. So that means that all the cooling system or cooling architecture of the system should be changed. No more cooling tower can be used if we should to match the requirement from the new standards. That's a big impact on the design and running for the data centers.
But standards take a long time to develop. Are the standards? I mean, I think you're partly saying, Nabeel, that the standards aren't here yet. They're still needed. We still need to develop more standards.
Yes.
Sorry. Karen Swanson.
Okay, so I think the standards, for example, for China, as I said just now, for the WE and PUE, it has been the government have researched it for, as I know, it has researched for more than 2 years. So next year will be formal issue of the new standards. So maybe it's not quick come, but it will be, I think, will be a big impact for the data center industry.
Nabeel, Mark, do you think that the standards that we need are here, or we still have to develop them?
I think some of them are here. I mean, again, a lot of the standards that were published in the 30134 series have been around since 2018, 2020. WUE and CUE were published last year. I think the frustration for me slightly is that they are there and that it's not being used. Again, we've got sort of focused on one metric, which is generally not actually either measured or reported according to the actual standard, to Nabeel's point. But they're out there. We should be using them. We should all have a dashboard which gives us a better understanding of our impact. It's all very well to say we can reduce our PUE by having adiabatic cooling, for instance, if we're increasing our water consumption massively. So, what we should be doing is having a dashboard of these metrics that show us our overall performance from a sustainability perspective. The frustration in our industry is we don't have an overall metric for energy efficiency, and we never will. It's been tried. A number of proxies have been developed. It is very difficult to get that miles per gallon type number that Nabeel talks about, because data centers all do very different things. How do you measure, let's say, an HPC data center that's doing, I don't know, computational analysis on, let's say, weather mapping or something like that, which is, in terms of data, relatively small and relatively little network traffic, versus a data center that's serving Netflix or something like that, which is all about network traffic and relatively little compute. So, how do we actually compare energy efficiency in that sense? And again, you've got to go back to the point that it's all about IT. Data centers themselves don't consume any power. The IT load within them consumes power, and the building merely puts an overhead on it. And that's what PUE is.
I understand. Nabeel, do you have...
I'll just echo what Mark said. There isn't that one global standard that is on the wish list. Would it be nice to have? Absolutely, yes. I think we need to get some major mathematicians and big data and scientists on this to do so. There are standards out there, and I would give this back to the industry that we have done a phenomenal job over the years, and we have lost our host, but we have done a phenomenal job over the years in coming up with the metrics that we have today, and they're a great starting point. Does it get us closer? Eventually, yes. But we also got to keep in mind that we are a very young industry. We're less than 40 years old, really.
Yeah.
So we are still maturing, and there's a lot more to learn from what we are doing, how we're doing that, and we need to get to a point eventually that we do have the unified standard in some way, form, or shape that can address compute utilization and energy efficiency on a global basis. There has to be something. We don't know what it is yet, but we've got to learn, and we've got to have these conversations and get closer to that.
Agreed. I think we've lost Di, haven't we?
We've lost the host.
Yes. Take over as our intrepid leader, please.
I can, yes. I know that you all agreed on a set of questions, didn't you, beforehand? I don't have a copy of it, but I can, while we're waiting tonight, we have got a question from the audience. I can pitch that to you if you're happy to answer that. So this is from James. Probably some of the difficulties are around how we feel bound to the way we've done things before. Although data centers like innovation, how can we move the needle to get further innovation into the industry? So if I don't know if anyone wants to sort of step up to that to have a go at that first, or
I'll have a stab at it. Hi, James. I know James reasonably well, and I think he's trying to poke with a sharp stick. So thanks, James. I think one of the things we have to do, I think, is we've got to explain to media and government what we actually do. We don't do a very good job of it. We've got a fairly big target painted on us by the media and government for destroying the planet or whatever they're saying. I think we've got to, firstly, to sort of get to the point of true innovation, I think we've got to actually define what we do and say what we do and have that out in the public. What we do is we allow very reliable IT services, highly available IT services. That's what we allow. We don't consume the energy. We allow others to consume energy, and we do have a bit of an overhead, but that's the price we pay for that reliability and security. So I think we've got to do that, and I think we've also then got to understand that that's the service we perform, and then I think we've got to drill down and look at the way we use IT. If you look at the UN figures, for instance. There's a figure that's often quoted about data center energy consumption, which is 3% of global energy production, which is incorrect. That number is global digital infrastructure energy consumption, of which data centers, or the infrastructure within data centers, is about half. So let's say 1.5%. What we've got to do, I think, is be far better. We've got to innovate at the IT level. We've got to have more efficient software. We've got, I think, as Nabeel said, we need a metric that will actually tell us how efficient we are being with our IT infrastructure. We've got to actually look at software, the way we develop software. At the moment, we develop the speed of not speed of execution, but speed of availability. We don't really take into account energy efficiency. Software developers don't pay energy bills. They don't care. And that's the sort of thing that we've got to change. That's where innovation has to come from. There's no point in continuing to navel gaze on the building. We are getting better at doing that, and so we should. But the real low-hanging fruit, the real innovation, the real energy efficiency lies in the IT stack, including software.
My apologies.
I was just going to say, Di, welcome back.
My apologies, my computer crashed for no apparent reason whatsoever.
Now that we're in virtual digital world, we are fully fed with that. I just asked the question that we had pitched to us from an audience member. Mark very graciously answered. So if you're happy, I'll hand back to you.
Well, I was hoping to move the conversation on the last 10-15 minutes that we got to something which is closer to my heart as a lawyer, which is to ask a question about GDPR and to ask whether the need to protect European Union and UK citizens' data under GDPR impinges upon building data centres outside the territories, and to what extent you're seeing privacy laws generally around the world affecting the design and location, I guess, as well, of data centres. Mark, do you want to take that one first, since you're here over here in the UK?
Well, I think I sort of taken a bit too much time to give you the chance to talk. But yeah, no, GDPR and data sovereignty generally, it's not just GDPR, data sovereignty is a real key. Yeah, absolutely. Nation states want to have data about their citizens that relates to their citizens within their national boundaries. And that's true even within the EU, which is supposed to have more of an open policy towards data handling and management. The nation states still want to do that. So will we see national data for Europe or the UK going into other countries? No, probably not. However, against that, you are seeing more and more nations building their own digital infrastructure and data center infrastructure for precisely that data sovereignty reason. So at the moment, if you look at Africa, that's booming, and a lot of that boom is being driven by data sovereignty requirements. And we can talk about edge or whatever. What's edge? Edge is merely a deployment strategy, but that deployment strategy is absolutely being driven by data sovereignty in many nations, and understandably so.
Swanson, do you see that in China in respect of privacy laws, the pressure on location of data center builds?
Yes, I think also I think it's the same situation in China. So the government, especially in last year, the government issued the law for protection of personal information. So that means that when we design a data center, you should think about the system, including the hardware and the software. For example, the security system or software system in the data center should think about the regulation from the data center, from the governments. That means that you have to, certify your equipment or your softwares. So that means that you have to invest more for the security or the information protection for the person. Yeah.
And Nabeel, is that something that you also see over in the US as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a common theme. I believe the biggest challenge is I think UK is actually coming to a point, Mark, and correct me if I'm wrong, that GDPR is no longer going to be acceptable on a go-forward basis, and there's something new that's supposed to be coming out.
I think it'll be, broadly speaking, the same. We just call it something different, I think.
Okay, well, call it Brexit.
well, yeah. No, I think we'll have to comply, because there's so much interaction between the UK and Europe that's going to be sort of a pretty close understanding, I would suggest. I don't think it's going to change that much.
Yeah, well, so we've got similar things in America as well. So we've got CCPA, CCPR, and a multitude of other ones. Yeah. Now, CCPA, CCPR reflects California primarily, but everybody seems to have their own version of it. Now, it is important. It is something that we need to take seriously as data center owners and operators. However, again, it's the biggest challenge is everybody's got their own version of it. There's no globalization around it, and the electrical mechanical facility folks, that's the last and the least thing for them to worry about. They pass the blame on to who? The application layer guys and the security and the compliance people. And the ones that are running that are the ones that are blind, because they are being led by the blind. They are being led by the likes of the regulators and the compliance agencies versus what is really needed in the industry. That needs to be addressed. I think foundationally, that's where we've got one of the weakest links. And what people forget is that we leave digital footprints behind, no matter what, where, when, and how. So, we've got to understand what our industry entails, and leaving digital footprints means that I can move traffic into China, or I can move traffic in the UK or Americas. And that needs to be addressed at the application layer, and the technical folks need to be a part of those designs and conversation, whether it be peering contracts, data flow, whatever the case might be. And it's going to end up being a bigger challenge as we move along. It needs to be taken very seriously.
Yeah, your comment about footprint is very interesting, Nabeel. I just hovered on the Zoom link that I have here, and you might do the same and get a different answer, I'm sure. But it says at the moment I'm connected to this call via the Zoom data center in Ireland. But of course, that's just via the data center in Ireland. As to which data centers our data is actually being, there is a footprint of our data in this call is anyone's guess. That's certainly more than just the one in Ireland, I'm sure.
Indeed. Yeah, that traffic is probably being routed to like 5 different data centers right now.
Yeah. So let's see if we can let me ask a bigger question. What do you think is the biggest challenge going forward for your company or companies you're assisting in designing data centers? What do you think is going to be the future? The biggest single issue, maybe something we've talked about, maybe something we haven't talked about. Sorry,
if I might take it, I'll take it first. So I think from my perspective, the biggest challenge is people. People that have been designing and operating environments for the last 40 years, doing it the same way. Change is difficult for them. Over the next few years, as we pass the baton to the younger generation, and them being a little bit more serious about the industry, or them wanting to eat their own dog food. Mark was briefly talking about that earlier. We support the most amount of compute. The only industry that doesn't eat our own dog food from a facilities and operational perspective, the adoption of that is a big challenge. For instance, metrics, power usage effectiveness, WE, and so on and so forth. Are we measuring everything and at the correct state? And that's the biggest challenge in the design approach and operational approach. We need to start documenting. The change of the guards is potentially going to help address part of that challenge. The way I put it is simply is, you remember the days when people used to wear black suits and red ties and white shirts, and they show up and they will sell that 1 3-letter brand just because it's proven and it's working, and I'm not going to change that because I don't want to lose my job. Well, the same thing applies in what we do today. There is still that guard that has that mindset. Well, you know what? I don't want to build a paper mache data center and kind of operate like a blockchain environment, because I don't know what the resiliency is. I don't know if the machines are going to take, or whatever the case might be. That mindset needs to change. And that, I believe, for us is the biggest challenge thus far, is that we are thinking disruptive ways of designing, building, and operating data centers. I talked about resiliency, and I talked about, for instance, paper mache data centers. That probably sparked some interest over here, ruffled some feathers. But the idea really is, we are in the data center business. The first word is data, right? What we do at the physical layer is in the centers. So as long as we can build those redundancies at the data level, then we are okay. And that needs to get across. And also potentially like, hey, you know what? There is that fear factor in the industry from a facilities perspective that we might lose our jobs if we move everything into the application layer, folks. But if we are able to bridge that communication, there's going to be more and more of this data globally. The industry, this is the only industry in the world that's growing at, double-digit CAGRs. So, and it's going to continue doing that. I can't even imagine actually going back in time and handwriting a letter anymore, much less taking a pen out of my bag. So the mindset really needs to change, and I believe how do we address that is eating our own dog food.
It's nice to know you still have a pen in your bag just in case, then, a bit.
Yeah, well, when I come back to Hawaii, I've got to fill out the paperwork. We still in Hawaii. We still handwrite everything, and they want I think they call it a wet signature on the documents.
So, Swanson, what do you reckon the biggest challenge for your company when designing data centers in the future?
I think with power, maybe I've mentioned before, the power, especially for the energy consumption for the center, is huge. So especially in China, with the government peaking and the government neutrality strategy, the authority department will control the gross energy used for the center.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Okay, thanks so much.
Cheers.
Just message on the chat if you have any problems, okay?
So I think, Vanessa, thank you. Carry on, Swanson.
Okay, and also the authority department will control the gross and also control the efficiency of the energy. That means that if you cannot get the power or the energy from the government, you cannot develop your new data centers. So that's critical for the company. And if you to match the efficiency requirement from the government, you have to select the new architecture of the data center or new solution for the data centers. For the example, the government issued the stricter PUE requirement. So that means that some of the solutions can not be used again for the new data center design. So, for example, for Alibaba, to develop the new solution, for example, for the immersion liquid cooling to match the new requirement from the government.
Mark, do you agree, disagree with what Nabeel and Swanson said, or you have something different? Which is
I completely agree with both of them, actually. I think to Nabeel's point, I think, we've got to break down the silos. If we're going to be more efficient and do a better job, we've just got to break the silos down. We've got this facility split, but even if you look at IT, we've got storage, network, compute, we're too siloed to be efficient. So it's a human thing, and getting the talent that can cross those silos is going to be very, very difficult, but that's what we need. That's absolutely what we need. And then I think to Swanson's point, it's going to be about sustainability and energy availability. Governments are going to impose sustainability targets on us. Swanson's mentioned PUE, I'm sure WE, and all those other metrics that we know and love are going to be imposed on us. Some governments will be sensible about it, some won't. So I think we're going to have to navigate something of a sustainability minefield in terms of legislation requirements, etc., to actually be able to build data centers, to get that planning permission, to be able to put down on the ground what we need. So I think you've got the CSRD requirements, EU taxonomy requirements coming in the EU next year. I'm sure that will influence others. As Swanson said, China is obviously looking at various metrics to monitor the build out of data centers. We're all going to be faced with that challenge. And again, some will be sensible, some will not. So it's going to be a bit of a deal.
Before we finish, any final comments, Swanson, Nabeel? Before we sign off, time is up, but not that we're being switched off. But any final comments, Swanson?
Yeah, I think it's my pleasure to talk about I think it's a hot topic for the data center industry. We face the challenge and most of the things. I think we need the standard, and we need to specify the issues in different countries, because I think the regulations or standard will be different. So that's my understanding and my input for the discussion. Yeah.
Fair enough. Nabeel, any final comments?
Yeah, I believe we need to put ourselves, and what I mean by that is our leaders in the space that we are in. We need to put ourselves in front of the political element of where we're headed. And the reason why I say that is because we know for sure that our world is going to be regulated deeper as we move along. And if we let it to the personal and political interest of people running in the likes of DC or London or in China, they will do it for their own personal interest versus the interest of the industry. And that's going to go into the wrong rabbit holes. So we need to get our voice heard, documented, and processes identified whereby they end up becoming the regulation versus it being dictated by political personal interests and gains. So it is important that we lobby, I can speak to America, that we lobby in DC and make sure that we are promoting the right regulation, we're promoting the right KPIs, we're promoting the right requirements on a go-forward basis with no personal interest, but the interest of the industry. That needs to be put forth and ahead of everything.
Mark, any final comments?
No, I agree with Nabeel. I'd actually go further and so move away from personal interests, and I agree with that point, is actually societal interests. Everything we do now is dependent on IT infrastructure, and IT infrastructure, broadly speaking, lives in data centers. So we've got to get this right. We can move away from data centers tomorrow. It means we go back to the Middle Ages. So we've got to get it right. So I think it's a challenge. I think the education of government, of regulators, is absolutely essential, and for them to understand just how critical the services they are. You'll hear governments say we want faster broadband, more broadband for all our citizens, and they criticise data centres for consuming more power. We've got to get over that hurdle, that sort of catch-22 situation. But the good thing about our industry, it will continue to grow, and I would encourage anybody that has kids or whatever, point them towards our industry. Get them into engineering and STEM subjects, and point them towards our industry, because we need talent. And there isn't enough talent to go around, and we need those smart people to come into it and actually move us forward to support the critical infrastructure that we now depend on.
Interesting topic to finish off on, concept of getting governments involved in IT, let alone data centers. Maybe that would be that could be the role of a future panel, which maybe could be organised about how to lobby governments and how to get governments interested in IT, let alone data centers. Thank you very much to the panel, Mark, Swanson, Nabeel, and for all the comments, and for getting up, particularly Swanson and Nabeel, in perhaps less sociable hours than Mark and I have. Thank you.
I was going to say thank you again to all of our panelists, whatever time zone you might find yourselves in right now. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.